Here's two guys that will lead the roving hordes, Aaron and Jonathan.
Howdy, and welcome to episode 21 of In the Rabbit Hole's Urban Survival Podcast. We're your hosts, Aaron
and Jonathan.
In today's episode, we have a hurricane party. You are in the rabbit hole, safe and sound. Today we're going to talk about hurricanes and hurricane preparedness. This is kind of what hurricane season started. What was it, last week, or was it week before last?
Last week or a little bit before that. Be honest, we don't pay too much attention to when hurricane season starts, and I don't mean that in a flippant way. It's just that we're prepared, so it doesn't matter whether it's hurricane season or not.
But hurricane season for preppers in hurricane path, and even preppers that aren't in hurricane parts of the country, hurricane season is a good time to take stock and inventory and kind of check your flashlights, check your batteries, go
Most
over
definitely.
Where everything is. And that's really what I use it for on my calendar every year. Is it's kind of a reminder, hey, maybe it's a good time to really stop and kind of go through everything, look at what I've got, make sure I haven't broken anything throughout the year or abused it during some kind of review or something like that.
This should probably be, in general, for everybody, one of your 6-month reviews. So every 6 months, you should go through, check your batteries, make sure everything's working. And 6 months is a good time frame. And if hurricane season's 1, then the next time around is, a little after New Year's.
Yeah. And even if you're not in parts of the country or parts of the world, for that matter, that are affected by hurricanes, it still is probably a pretty good show because was it Jack Spirko has the disaster commonality matrix. Yep. And that basically means that within all disasters, especially natural disasters, there's a commonality. Your needs, 99% of your needs are really all about the same. You basically need the same things to comfortably get through a disaster in one natural disaster as you would through another.
Especially weather-based ones. They're all relatively similar in the impact to you.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're different in what they do, but the impact to you is pretty much the same. I just read an interesting statistic, maybe 10 minutes ago?
I think it was 10 minutes ago.
That 99% of all presidentially declared disasters are actually weather-related. So chances are you're going to see a weather-related disaster at some point or another.
And you called out how many people are killed annually?
500 every year.
Now, that number's probably changed.
It's probably higher this year.
This year because we've had an exceptionally active year.
Yeah, and then $14 billion in damage.
Wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, it seems like something people should be ready for in general, but I guess mostly this community does it. I know in Houston, though, we do see a lot of hurricane preparation.
Yeah, we do see a lot of it, and not as much as we would like to see the general populace do, because I think people still have, even though it's something we go through every year, people do it, but I think it's almost kind of a naive, oh, well. And you had an experience that you were telling me about while we were running around town today.
Yeah, it was interesting. So for those of you who know what Costco is, it's one of the big box stores. I was at Costco a few weeks ago, and people are hearing about hurricane season because it's on the news here, especially Houston. Again, we get hit pretty hard regularly, or at least semi-regularly. And there was a couple in the frozen food section as they were passing a large section of frozen vegetables. And the husband said to the wife, you know what? We should really prepare for hurricane season and make sure we have about 2 weeks worth of food. And all of a sudden they start packing up their shopping cart with frozen vegetables. 2 weeks worth of frozen vegetables. Aaron and I were talking. This is not a wise idea. I do not recommend stocking up on frozen vegetables.
But now, frozen being the key point that we're trying to make here.
Highly recommend stocking up on canned foods, freeze-dried foods, things like that. But frozen vegetables, not a good idea. They are perishable. When the freezer goes out because electricity is no longer there, you're going to run into a problem.
And so, Nice segue for us into food storage. In episode 10, we did food storage basics. And for those that haven't heard it before, we will, as always, put a link to it in the show notes today. But the first part that you need to look at, we're not going to go into depth about food storage today, but some basic things that we're going to talk about. Like we said a minute ago, stay away from frozen stuff. Frozen stuff's fine, but that should be the stuff that's always in your refrigerator. It's not really where you want to put things.
It's also going to be the things that when the disaster, that's the first things you go through.
Yeah, you eat everything out of your refrigerator and out of your freezer as long as it's still good first.
And another just general tip, cooked items last longer than raw items. So if you lose power and you expect to be without power for a period of time, cook the meats, cook the vegetables, cook what you need to. And I don't mean raw vegetables that are necessarily don't need to be refrigerated. Onions, for instance, will last a long time. Potatoes will last a long time. But a lot of refrigerated lettuce, things like that, or spinach,
Mm.
things that'll wilt like that, you're going to want to cook it up, turn it into something that you can eat within a couple of days.
And something that you can do that will help you year round. I've never been able to find definitive information on exactly how much this will impact your electricity, but it has multiple. Um, what's what I'm looking for? It has multiple benefits, and that taking water bottles, and I wrote an article about it, and I wish I could remember where I put that article, for what website I wrote the article, but it was simply that you take water bottles and you fill them with water and you stick them in the freezer if you have any empty space in your freezer. And that does two things. One, year round, the less empty space within your freezer that your freezer has to keep cool, it's sucking up a lot of energy and doing a lot of work for it. But if you load it up with basically bricks of ice, in plastic water bottles and stuff like that, then you're taking away the amount of empty space that your freezer has to keep cold. The other thing that you can do with that is if the power goes out, you immediately have large blocks of ice that can be put into the refrigerator to help keep the refrigerator cold, or can be transferred to a cooler, and then you can move food and stuff into that cooler. And then depending on what kind and how fancy of a cooler you got is, but you can usually at least get a few days
Oh yeah, it's
out of a
the
cooler.
cooler's good, and actually keep it in your freezer for a little while. So your freezer's a great cooler, especially
Hmm.
newer freezers. If you have a full freezer, and one of the things Aaron was talking about with the water is it allows you to have a full freezer can actually go 2 days as long as you don't sit there opening it and staring at it.
Well, that takes all the fun out of it, man.
Right. So don't open your freezer in a disaster like this. But if you keep it closed, your freezer makes a good cooler. Remember, you open it up, you're letting all that cold air out. Um, keep it closed, keep everything in there, and you can actually get about 2 days out of your freezer by leaving everything in there and closed. After that, you're going to want to quickly transfer it to the cooler
Hmm.
with hopefully new ice if you can find it or get it, and that'll extend your time by days.
But your brick, those ice bricks, if you've made them, will last for a couple of days.
Yeah.
I genuinely tested this out when Jason McCall and I went to an Appleseed shoot a couple months back. It was Texas, so it was already freaking hot. But I did not stop and get any ice and fill our cooler with ice. Instead, I just grabbed. I use the Fiji bottles because they're square and they pack nicely. So I took a bunch of the, what is it, 1.5? Hold on, I'm looking at one now. 1.5 liter Fiji bottles, and just filled the cooler with that around the edges, and then stuck all the food in the center. And it kept it through. There was still ice in those bottles after 2.5 days
Oh yeah, the good
of being out.
igloos. There are 7-day rated igloos out there, and
Yeah.
they'll maintain temperatures of very low for a while. They will not be freezer cold.
No.
But one of the things to keep in mind and to watch for, not all of you have a thermometer that can do this, but if you do, the food is no longer going to be good once it starts getting above 40 degrees.
Hmm.
So over 40 degrees and you start running into trouble and serious trouble. So foodborne illness, things like that.
And it happens pretty fast.
Happens very, very fast. That's why I say 2 days is kind of the max on a full freezer, and that's if you didn't open it.
Yeah. The last benefit to doing the water bottles is once the water has melted down a little bit, you can then drink that water If it's been in your freezer, you've not been taking it out, it's not been sitting out in the sun, nothing should have grown in it. If you never opened the water bottle or if you just took water out of the tap, there's going to be a little bit of chlorine in it. Nothing should have grown in there. So you can drink the water out of that bottle. And if you've been without power and if you're in an area like us where it's, like I said a minute ago, freaking hot, then you've got a cold bottle of water you can drink from.
The more water, the better. And remember, when there's a mass power outage, the water treatment plants go out as well after a while. They don't go out on day one, but eventually they do fail because their generators go out as well. And so that's something I know during Ike when we were here in Houston. There was a boil water warning, so you had to boil your water if you wanted to use it as out of the tap. But it was best to have a water supply in your house.
And another nice segue into water storage. Now, was it episode 19 or episode 20 where we did the listener challenge?
20.
If you have ever come across a legitimate scientific test that can explain why you're not supposed to store water on concrete. I'm not talking about the anecdotal conversations on different forums and stuff or articles people have written, unless there is a real scientific body that did a study and said, this is what's happened. This is the chemical that gets leached into it. Here are our findings. Here's the report you can read. Like I said, I just want to stress this real scientific study, not I heard it from a guy who heard it from a guy who heard it from a guy. But we have a personal
Exactly.
joke between us, which is every lie, if you tell it 3 times, becomes truth.
Right.
And we have a sneaky suspicion that that's what's happened with storing water on concrete. So,
Especially because so much water is stored in concrete cisterns anyway.
yeah, that's
I mean,
kind of the funny thing about
I
it.
don't understand where all this is coming from. So again, if you have the scientific study, and I'll even accept, I don't know if Aaron will, but I'll accept if you are a scientist, I mean a certified, real scientist who studies these kinds of chemical reactions, and you can come in and explain it to us.
Then
We'll
we'll do a
accept that.
show with you.
Yes, we will. We will have you on the show, and you can explain it to all of us.
We want to see credentials first, but
Right.
But
Most
yes,
definitely.
please use the feedback form to notify us if you have any of that information. Water storage in general sense, moving past the concrete issue, you can use a lot of water companies. Like I know Ozarka. I don't know if Ozarka's Are they national or are they local?
I believe Ozarka's pretty national. They have a very wide coverage, but it's the 2.5 gallon bottles
Yeah, and
is what Aaron's talking about.
and the reason I like 2.5 in particular is for 2 people and a pet. Each one of those is a day. So you have, a pet of, let's say, like the Tactical Weimaraner alert system, who's, I think he sits around 80 pounds. So a half gallon for him is pretty much covers him for his needs. And then you have the 1 gallon per person per day. So each one of those, I love them because they're no brainers. You grab one and for every 2 people and a pet, you're covered.
Yeah, and they're relatively easy. I personally have
Mhm.
gone with the 7 gallon, and I transfer. So I actually fill my 7 gallon jugs because you can't go. I haven't found anywhere where you can buy 7 gallon pre-filled from Ozarka or anything like that.
Well, you can buy those big water cooler things,
Right, and that's
but
why.
but they don't have a nozzle unless you have one of those water coolers
Exactly.
in your home.
And that I've got the big jugs that are 7 gallons. They have the nozzle.
You're using the Reliance.
I believe so.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that
Oh,
up.
are we going to get into those?
that Reliance makes a couple of different sizes, and for those concerned with it, they're now making them BPA free.
Yes.
We won't get into a discussion about the pros or cons or what that all means, but for those that do know what it means and are concerned with it, they make them. They make them in, I believe I've seen a 2.5 gallon. They make a 5 gallon and they make a 7 gallon. And I have the 5 gallons. I also have a 7 gallon. I just don't like the shape of the 7 gallon.
Yeah, for me the shape works because of the way I store them.
Yeah.
And the reason I like 7 gallon and kind of the same simplicity that Aaron likes 2.5. I like the 7 gallon because it's one person for 1 week.
Yes.
And so you can look at it that way. And the way I do it is I've got 3 weeks per person and 3 weeks per pet, essentially, in my house.
Now, water storage, just like we've kind of talked about in the basic food storage, don't put all your eggs in one basket. So if you're in a multi-story home a little, store a little on the first floor, store a little on the second floor. Really don't want to stick everything all together. You can, but it's better to spread it out a little bit.
And a product we recently ran into to help you do this, and now we have not had, I'm going to admit, we haven't had a chance to test it yet.
But
I've got one
Robert
on order.
Robert
And
from Talon Arms has one,
yes,
and he
and he
did say
loves
he
it.
really loved it.
It's the water bob. And essentially, you put this giant bag in your bathtub, you fill the bag, it has a built in pump, and you can actually pump the water out of it so you can utilize all of it. And they come in two sizes. I admit that I do not have the two sizes in front of me right now, but one is large and the other one is very, very large. I mean, it fills a bathtub. So think of it as it covers the two standard bathtub sizes. So think of a shallower bathtub and then a deep bathtub. Um, and you get that much water in it. And again, with the pump, it makes it very useful. And you could have a few of these in your house. They're relatively inexpensive. I think they're about somewhere between $16 and $20 a piece.
Yeah, they're very inexpensive. And if you had a communication with the CEO of the company
Yes.
recently, and we'll be getting one in October.
Right. Post hurricane season, right now it sounds like they're in full production and they
Yeah.
can't send out review units. Now, I've personally bought one that's on its way. So I'll let everybody know how that is when I get it in a few weeks.
But if they're the way the CEO on a Sunday called you up,
Yeah.
if that's any indication, their customer service is probably pretty good. But I can't imagine what you would.
Yeah,
It's a pretty simple device.
It's a simple device. It's a heavy duty bag with a pump built in. Looks pretty easy. And again, Robert from Talon Arms, who all of you know from previous shows, I think he said he had two and he loves them.
And he was the one that originally told us about
Yes, he
them.
did. And since then, it's funny when you hear about something, you tend to run into it a lot afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Since he mentioned it, I've now seen it in many, many places. For those of you that know the website, Cheaper Than Dirt has them, and they seem to have really good prices on it right now.
Well, that's good. Kind of like the name implies.
Yes,
Oh,
cheaper than dirt.
Cheaper than dirt.
Exactly.
Other less conventional places that if you get to the point of desperation that you can look for water, are your hot water heater is kind of a classic. Now, there is an issue with that I think when most people discuss the hot water heaters, they fail to mention your hot water heater. Okay, if you have an Insta hot water heater, this doesn't apply to you. But if you have the big 50 or 80 gallon tank hot water
Then
heater,
again, the Insta hot water heater doesn't make for any storage anyway. So,
well, yeah, that was kind of my point with that, but and kind of useless in a power outage situation.
Exactly.
But the 50 or 80 gallon, well, there you have 50 or 80 gallons of water. There's two things though. One, you need to make sure that it was a backflow valve, so that the water, if the city shuts down the water doesn't drain out of it.
Which in most places is part of code, but check to see if you have one anyway.
And if you've got an old enough home,
right.
I don't know how you would have a water heater still functioning that's that old, but
right. But just make sure you have a functioning backflow valve. I've even heard stories where they're installed backwards.
That's rather comical. Not for the people that had it, but
right. But I have heard those stories. So, it's one of those things when you go through and maintain it, just check all of that, and that's the next piece, maintenance of them.
The next piece is maintenance of it, and if you want, there's good videos on YouTube of it. There's a great video of it on Ron Hood's Urban Survival DVD video, which is a pretty good video set in general. We'll put a link to that. I think we've talked about it in the past. But we'll put a link to it in today's show notes, where he actually shows and goes through the process and talks about it. But basically, what you need to do is, over time, your hot water heater, the process of heating up the water, separates minerals from the water, especially if you're in areas where you have heavy water, like we do. We have really heavy water here in Houston. And so silt builds up in the bottom of your hot water heater. And this is actually what causes most water heaters to go bad after the 10 to 15 year rating they give them, is the buildup of silt, and they become much less efficient. So every 6 months, and I recommend watching the videos, because I'm not going to give a long explanation of how to do it. Basically, you take a water hose, you attach it to the drain port, you shut down the hot water heater, you go through a few other safety procedures, and then you drain the tank until nothing but clear water comes out. And it really does need to be done about every 6 months. I've heard people say do it a year, but really, I've listened and I've watched and I've having done it myself a couple times, every 6 months really is optimal, especially for the people in areas that have heavier water. That's one. Another one that's not as exciting and some people may be a little turned off by is, but there's no reason to be, which is the tank on the back of your toilet
Hmm.
is fresh potable water. It's not been contaminated with bacteria and
Right.
stuff.
And here's another just little note on that. Because it's the back of a porcelain, usually porcelain object, it insulates very well. So that water is going to
Yeah.
be cool, most likely, or at least cooler than other water in the house.
And I think that depending on how old your toilet is, that gives you between, what is it, 1 gallon and 2 gallons.
Yeah, sometimes 2.5
Yeah,
even.
I don't know what the new regulations.
Yeah, it can be enough water to get you through another day.
Yeah.
Or if it grosses you out, but you need water for your pet,
Yeah,
there
your
you
pets
go.
love toilet water.
Yeah.
I know mine does,
Now they
but
don't care whether they drink it out of the front or the back, but again,
yeah, they really don't. They don't really don't care. But there's that. As long as you don't have one of the toilets that have the mechanically assisted flushes,
right.
the big crazy ones that when you flush them, they sound like a jet engine's taking off. They might suck you down with it.
We also don't recommend putting the those chemical blue things in the back
Yes,
because that eliminates your ability to use that water.
exactly. So those are the things to do with water. Now, the key things to remember with storing water, to backtrack for just a second, is make sure that any of the containers that you store them in are opaque. They do not let light through. I know I mentioned the Ozarka 2.5 gallon that I like those. Now those are mostly they're kind of a
They're transparent, but at least they're usually come in a
yeah,
cardboard
they
box.
come in a cardboard box, or put them in a closet, put them sunlight somewhere away from sunlight. The cooler the environment you can put them in, the better, and they should last pretty much indefinitely. I know that question floats around on the internet a lot, which is, how long does water store?
Well, for those of you who remember Ron, and I think he might have said it on the show too, but I don't remember if he did.
Yeah.
In the last show, he mentioned that he actually called Ozarka to ask, and they pretty much said the water's good indefinitely.
Yeah, they will put an expiration date on it,
Right.
but that's more of an FDA cover CYA. But water will, as long as water was stored in a sterile environment and the water itself was either sterile or regular chlorinated water, you shouldn't have any problems. And like what we were talking about a minute ago with the Reliance containers, I don't know if you do this. I think we talked about it. Do you put a little bit of bleach or
I
something?
rinse them when I first wash them out.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you even have to do this. I just do it because, well, you're buying them from a store and who knows what,
Right. Who knows what
where they
kid stuck
were.
his tongue in it or.
Exactly. So I wash them out and I do just a cap full of
Hmm.
bleach as I fill it up. Just, those small caps. Pour that in first, then I fill it up, swish it around a whole bunch. I dump it, and then I'll do that about 2 or 3 times.
Hmm.
Because I personally, I know that a cap full of bleach and 7 gallons of water won't kill you, but
Yeah.
I don't really want to taste it or have to think about it.
Hmm.
So I wash it out a few times, and by the time I'm done, I fill it up, and then I'm done.
Yeah, I pretty much do the same thing. But the important thing to walk away from here is, if it's fresh out of the store, you don't know what somebody else did to it. Wash it out, and as long as everything's sterile, you don't have to be fanatical about it. But as long as everything was sterile, your water should store pretty much indefinitely. It's not. There's nothing wrong, and it may even be a good practice to go ahead and cycle that water the same way you would cycle canned goods or anything else on a regular basis. Not a bad idea, but just keep in mind, don't obsess over it. It's not going to go
I
bad.
think leaving it alone is probably your best bet because you're not going to be opening it up to the air or anything else.
Yeah.
Just kind of leave it there and let it do its thing.
Well, unless you're using as far as I meant cycling, I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
mean cycling if you're doing the Reliance, just leave it alone. But if
Yeah.
you're doing like the Ozarka bottles or
Oh yeah, then
something,
cycle through them and
then cycle through it.
hell use them. It's all good.
Yeah.
Something to keep in mind as we just finished kind of food and water, and you might be asking yourself, well, how much food and water do I need? I mean, beyond the gallon a day kind of discussion. I'm just going to leave you with this. Aaron may have a slightly different view. I've personally got 3 weeks worth of all that stuff, and the reason I've done 3 weeks is that during Ike we were without power for just over two. And I mean 2 solid weeks of just over that of no power know anything. I know Aaron was in a similar. I think he was actually a day more than I was.
Yeah, I was like 1 day more or something.
Um, so based on that, I went as 3 weeks. So I could have gone at a month. I know Aaron probably has more than I do. Some people have less. A lot of websites will tell you 3 to 7 days. I personally, again, this is just my view of it. I would recommend at least 2 weeks and 3 weeks kind of at the other end, maybe even more if you want to. And if you want to get into the general food prep and everything else, then you go for further. But if you're just talking about preparedness for a disaster, 3 weeks is really, I think, 2 to 3 weeks is the minimum.
Yeah, I think after 2 weeks, you really should have, unless we're talking about some truly large scale disaster,
Yeah.
you should be receiving some kind of assistance
Yeah.
within that amount of time. There's nothing wrong with going as far as your space and budget will allow you to. Nothing
Right.
wrong with that at all. But I know a lot of people there's space constraints and stuff, and so and because storing that much water does consume a lot of physical
Yeah.
square footage.
And I
But
mean, to be fair to, to FEMA, not, well, I don't know if it was FEMA or just local, it doesn't matter.
I think it was FEMA you're talking about.
But to be fair to all of the, well, I'm not even talking about the 7 days now. What I'm looking at really is during Ike, one of the things that they tried to do is as they were restoring power, they took into account grocery stores, gas stations, things like that, and they tried to bring them up first. Because interesting thing about gas station, the gas stations might actually have gas, but if they have no power, you can't pump gas.
Yeah.
So that was one of the interesting things within Houston city limits, which is everybody thought the gas stations were out of gasoline. The reality is we had it, we just didn't have the power to pump it
Mm-hmm.
or run credit cards or anything else.
Yeah.
Which leads us to the next thing, talking about supplies.
Supplies. Well, let's start out with kits. We've talked in episode 16, we covered all kinds of different bags and what those different bags uses are, and we covered contents and stuff like that. So if you want a more in-depth conversation about the different bug out bags and stuff like that, go listen to episode 16 if you haven't already. But we'll start with a blackout kit because it's Murphy's Law. If stuff's going to go wrong, it's going to happen in the middle of the night. Never fails.
Yeah, oddly, Ike hit in the middle of the night.
Yeah. It's like every hurricane always hits in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
So a blackout kit, I like to keep mine under my under my bed. That's generally where I recommend people keep them, or at least within. It doesn't necessarily have to be under your bed, but it can be close to your bed, someplace that when you step out of bed, you can get to it.
Within 3 to 5 feet is probably a good.
Yeah, someplace that you can reasonably reach it. You don't put it clear across the room. And there's a couple reasons why you don't want it clear across the room. When you're woken up in the middle of the night, you're groggy. I know somebody that woke up in the middle of the night and was trying to shoo the cat out of the room or something, and then they ended up kicking a wall and breaking their foot. I don't think they were trying to kick the cat. I think they were just moving. But,
Sure.
well, they might have been trying to kick the cat. But the idea is that you want to keep these items pretty close to the bed so that you wouldn't necessarily even have to get out of bed to get to these items. And some of these items include a flashlight, extra batteries for those flashlights, an emergency radio, a headlamp, a fire extinguisher. And we want to point out that the fire extinguisher, you really want the multi-purpose A, B, and C fire extinguisher. And there's a whole article on blackout kits by themselves on the site, which we'll put a link to in the show notes today. And there is a video that we pulled off YouTube that does a really good job of explaining how to use a fire extinguisher and what the different classifications mean. Fire extinguishers, you don't just pull them out of the box and use them. If you've never actually seen the appropriate way to use a fire extinguisher, you should watch that video because you don't just point it in the general direction of a fire and kind of shoot it. It doesn't work well that way. It's optimal to, well, I'm just going to say, go read the article, go watch the video.
It'll be easier that way than
Yeah.
Honestly, watching it is the easiest thing to do versus having it explained to you verbally.
Exactly.
Hey, one note on the emergency radio.
Mhm.
A radio you do want is one that has a weather band on it. The NOAA weather alert system radios are probably your best bet. They actually have tones, and you can set them. There's all kinds of NOAA radios out there, but a lot of them will have settings to actually allow it to be set so that when a severe storm's coming through, it alerts you before you have to do anything. And on those, you just want to check the batteries again every 6 months and make sure, just like you do your smoke detectors.
Mm-hmm. Did we say first aid kits? I can't remember
You
if I
did.
said
You
it.
said
Okay,
first aid
so
kit. Yep.
first aid kits covered. An emergency tool. There's a four. It's called the 4-in-1 emergency tool. We'll put a link to it. It's also linked in the Blackout Kit article. And the Blackout Kit article has a full bulleted list of the items and conversations about why you'd want them. But I'm just running through the most important items from that. But the emergency tool is important because if something happens or something's damaged, you want to easily, without looking for a wrench or trying to figure out which kid or whoever walked off with whatever tool, have a tool ready, available. You always know where it is. It never gets moved, that you can go turn off your gas and if need be turn off your water with. That's and you can also pry things with it, which you may be in some kind of situation where you need to get to that bag and pry something away from something. That's really kind of why I like blackout kits and why I like them under the bed, because that is your most likely place to run into an issue where you're going to be waking up out of a sound sleep, not fully thinking. You have everything there, the basics of what you would need to deal with any reasonable situation that could come up in the middle of the night, barring any kind of self-defense stuff, which if you're already into self-defense, then you're into self-defense. I don't even think we really need to go into that today. We
Yeah.
are proponents of it. If we'll let you choose your methods of how you choose to ensure your own safety within your home. But moving on past blackout kits, something I don't know if we've ever really. I think we talked about it a little bit in episode 16, but we've never really gone into it. It doesn't need to real depth, but an attic kit.
Yeah, I think it's a highly overlooked item.
Hmm.
Like even in my home, it's a
Yes.
highly overlooked item, and they're interesting because how many times have you seen video post flood or hurricane and there's people on the roofs?
And I think one of the things, reading a lot of the different accounts of people that have stayed behind in hurricanes when they probably should have bugged out, or when bugging out just wasn't an option. One of the most horrific ways I can imagine dying in a disaster like that is dying up in your attic.
Yeah, because you're trying to escape the water coming in on the first floor. Now, I'm gonna as we're going into this, I'm gonna say one thing that I think everybody needs to be very well aware of. If you are in a mandatory evacuation zone, then get out. Get out, do what you need to get out, but leave. Because those mandatory evacuation zones, that's where you hear about the 500 people a year dying plus. Um, when you hear about people in Ike who died, really the majority of that, and I think it was a significant majority. I'm not even sure I heard about deaths outside the evacuation.
Mm-mm.
The only deaths I heard about were in areas where people were told flat out to get out. So if somebody who is official comes to you and says this is an evacuation zone, even if it's not a mandatory evacuation zone, but if you're listed in one of the evacuation zones, then we do not recommend bunkering down.
Yes. So, but what the attic kit does is if you do get caught off guard or for whatever reason you wind up in your attic, that's how a lot of people end up dying is of heat stroke and heart attacks and all kinds of stuff up in their attics. The reason is they can't get to water, they can't get to fresh air, they can't signal to rescue workers that they're trapped in their attic. So, an attic kit is very simple. First, if you're making your way up to your attic, make sure to grab a bottle of water. But if you don't, grab your blackout kit and take it with you up into the attic.
Yeah.
But I always recommend keeping a small, just absolute essential attic kit up there so that no matter what happens, you forgot to grab your blackout kit, whatever, it's there. And the items I recommend for it are a signal mirror. They're very cheap. I think you can pick them up at most outdoor stores for like $1.
Oh yeah, they're everywhere.
They're everywhere. A flashlight. The shake up flashlights are fine. The hand crank flashlights are fine. If you're going to store a flashlight up in your attic, store the batteries separate. They do not need to be in the flashlight.
Or you'll bake them.
You'll bake them, they'll corrode, they'll destroy themselves and the flashlight. and an axe or a hatchet, or really a hatchet. Small
Something
hatchet is
small
better than
enough to be
axe.
able to maneuver within your attic. Because
Yeah,
remember, you don't have the space to wield an entire axe through a swing
unless you have
in
like
your attic.
giant an attic.
Yeah,
But
if you've got some crazy vaulted attic, well, good for you. But otherwise,
yeah,
I'm recommending a hatchet.
glow sticks might also be a good thing to have up in there, just in case something went wrong with your flashlight.
And they tend to be pretty heat resistant.
Yeah, they're nasty chemical
Yep.
concoctions, so they're fine. The ones I have in mine are I've never tested them, but they seem to be still in good shape. So those are the basics, and like I said, the axe or the I gotta stop saying axe, a hatchet, or even if you just a hammer, something that you can break through roofing material with. A hatchet really is ideal because most homes have sheathing on the roof or decking on the roof,
Yeah, well, it's going to
and
be decking, and then over that weather sheathing, and then
yeah,
over that you're going to have shingles. And believe it or your roof is stronger than you think it is.
yeah, and so that's the idea, is that you really want something that can kind of tear through that. And now there is a clever company, and I didn't put the name in the show notes of, but they have an attic escape hatch. I'm gonna admit I have no experience with
None
this
here either.
at all. They look interesting, probably not a bad idea. The only issue I could possibly see with him is the same issue that skylights tend to have in homes, which is your home's going to shift a little bit and shimmy, and you could very easily develop water leaks from that. Again, I don't have any experience with these. I'm just talking out of my own personal background from architecture, but they they could be a fantastic thing and negate the need for the hatchet, or being worried about having the physical strength to actually break through. If maybe we're talking about an elderly couple that you're doing this for, or if you're an elderly couple listening to us, those are some options to consider. We talked a little bit about weather band radios, which there's several different kinds of technologies that you can use to stay in contact. Granted, you lose power or something, not all of these are going to be available to you throughout the entire ordeal. But now, since we've got smartphones these days, a lot of times email will still come through and stuff on your smartphone. So, some things you can do is you can go to the Weather Channel and you can sign up for weather alerts. I did this, God, I think it was about 2 years ago, and it's nice. I like it. I'll admit, I don't always pay attention to them. The other part of it that I find a little irritating is that they don't just send you one, they send you, I'm not going to say a flood, but they'll send you
It's a
back-to-back
flood.
emails.
As many times as they update their weather alert, which can be 20 times an hour even,
Yeah.
they will send you a notice.
In a hurricane, it probably wouldn't be that bad.
Right.
In thunderstorms and stuff, it's very annoying because it's like, yeah, I can see there's a thunderstorm. They're they can be a little annoying, but I guess in a situation where you're really dependent on getting as much information about everything as you can, then they're great.
Right. And this is why I like the customizable weather band radios too.
Yeah.
Because you want one with with the ability to not have to hear every single alert that comes through.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't have a preference. I actually do not have a brand name in mind right now. But if we find one we like, we'll let everybody know.
I have the small Red Cross
That's what I have
that
too with the
cranks up
crank.
and it's flashlight. And I've gone on and I've read reviews about them and stuff, and some people like them, some people don't. I haven't taken the time, honestly. I'm like, it's there. I know it's there. I check it occasionally. It works. That's good enough for me. I have a juice orange to power my cell phone. I don't worry about whether or not the thing's going to work with my iPhone or not.
And actually, this is a good time to kind of mention cell phones and things like that as we're talking about it. If you don't, for instance, have a juice orange, make sure that going into a major disaster, keep it as charged as possible as you enter the disaster. So if you know a hurricane's coming, for instance, the thing about hurricanes is that you know they're coming. Unlike tornadoes that kind of just, you might have a little bit of warning. Hurricanes, you usually have a good amount of warning.
Yeah, I usually have a couple days.
Right. So since you know which day it's going to hit, you're again, you're not in an evacuation zone, but you're in an area that's still going to get nasty winds, nasty weather, potential blackouts. Make sure you keep your electronic devices charged, the ones you need. Keep your iPhone charged because it may be the way you communicate with the rest of the world. And what we noticed during a lot of things like Ike, and they noticed it during Katrina too, while voice communication goes down, text messaging continues to work. It might be delayed by hours even, but it will work. And you will be able to get that text out to somebody, maybe an out of state relative, to say, yes, I'm okay, and I'll get in touch with you as soon as I can. And maybe you send one a day just to let them know you're all right. And every day you send that update. Might take an hour to get to them, but at least they know.
Other things you can do with technology are the National Weather Center. They have I'm not going to say it's the most beautiful website in the world, but it gives you the information. They have a nice map on there that it updates constantly with positions of where hurricanes are, where hurricanes are building up, what their projected paths are, things like that. They even have an RSS feed to those maps that I personally subscribe to, and I keep it in my email client, and they pop up, and anytime any of the maps changes, then you just kind of click on them and look at them. And you can also go to them. I make it kind of a part of my morning ritual of websites that I look at as I'm eating breakfast. During hurricane season was one of the first ones I'll go to. That Yeah, I'll go to that National Weather Center site first and look to see, are there any hurricanes that are forming? Are there any potential areas that are forming? So that I kind of stay on top of knowing what's happening in my region. And I do believe they have it broken down by region.
Yeah,
I,
they
I
do.
and so you can kind of pick and choose where you look at them.
And then there's one more item for those of you with iPhones, and I believe there's an Android app as well. It's called Hurricane. It's made by Kitty Code. Okay, that's KITTY code, and it's Hurricane. They're in version 3.5 right now. It's the app I have on my iPhone. Pretty sure Aaron has the same one.
I'm actually looking right
Um,
now to see.
I give it very high marks. I like the app a lot. It has a lot of very useful information. It allows you to track a storm coming in, see where it is, see where it's going. They keep the information up to date, and they'll show you all of the predictor maps that tell you the possibilities of where things are going to hit.
That is actually the same one that I use.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we'd both recommend that app. I think it's
Hmm.
great. Right now, they've updated it to the 2011 storms list. It updates in real time. So when you open it, it tells you the latest information.
Yeah, you get maps and everything with it. It's pretty nice little application.
And like I said, I think there's an Android version of it as well. I could be wrong. And if there isn't, there is another app, I'm sure, for Android that works, and I'm sure BlackBerry has one also.
And if you have a hurricane app on your BlackBerry, iPhone, or Android, different from the one we've said, please put it in the show notes today and let other people know if you tried it, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, stuff like that.
Go into some home tips.
Home tips it is. Okay, basic stuff. Take a walk around your yard. Take a look at your house. Um, n- Take note of any branches from trees that are hanging over your home. Have a professional come out and remove those. Unless you genuinely and honestly know how to do it, then have that cleared away. It's unnecessary. You don't want it. I know at my house, I've got pecan trees, and I swear to God, if it's like if you sneeze in the backyard, a giant branch from the pecan tree falls off.
I have a giant white oak in my
And
backyard.
you actually had
I
an
did
issue
just a
recently.
few weeks ago, not hurricane season or anything. We had a large branch come through the roof, and I just got my roof done. So for those of you who want to feel sorry for me, feel free. I know I'm pitying myself, but yeah, just a few weeks ago. So we have had the tree trimmed since, so there are no more branches over the house. But it's something I do it every year. It just happened to fall about 2 weeks before I would have had it done. Uh, so again, just look into it. Make sure it's not a bad habit to get into to just check around anyway, because all it takes is one strong wind to blow a large branch through your roof, and even if it doesn't hurt anybody, it causes damage and it's expensive.
And then you have the hassle and irritation of dealing with it after the fact.
Exactly.
If you do not have storm windows, consider cutting plywood or having someone cut plywood to size, and make sure that you have it fully figured out how you're going to attach it to over the windows. Go ahead, get that out of the way now. I am always amazed when we have a hurricane coming and we're in Houston. It's not a surprise that you're going to get a hurricane almost every year. And yet people wait to the last minute, run out to the home improvement store to get plywood
And they're
and
always
tarps and everything else.
surprised the home improvement
Yeah,
store's out of plywood and wood and whatever else they need.
it just blows my
The same
mind.
thing happens with the grocery store, by the way. If
Yes.
you know a storm is coming for a week, and that's about how long we normally know, sometimes longer.
Mm.
But if you know for at least a week that a storm is coming, and the first time you go to the grocery store to buy supplies, the day of the storm or the day before, and you are surprised by them being out of everything, well, really your problem at that point.
Yes. So consider getting the plywood or any kind of other window coverings. Take care of that now while there is nothing going on, while you don't.
Right. And a lot of you may be listening, and I'm going to bring it up now because it's just something that went through my head, and thinking, well, that's a Houston problem, that's a Florida problem. Um, but I'm going to say this: looking at water temperatures recently, and one of the things a lot of the weather forecasters are telling us is this year storms are going to hit a lot further north on the East Coast than they normally do. The waters are very warm. Florida may actually get it a lot easier this year because the waters are so warm north of it that it may draw the storms north. So for those of you who normally live in the Northeast and go, well, hurricanes don't really hit here. Uh,
You might think
y-
again this year.
exactly. This year, make sure you're prepared. And I'm not saying that so that you listen to the show and go out and buy a whole bunch of stuff. I'm saying that because, quite honestly, be prepared.
Hmm. You can also consider storm windows if you've been thinking about it and putting it off. Now's the time to maybe think more seriously about doing it. I know it can be a pretty big expense, but if it's within your means, then by all means, go ahead and do it. Now, you can actually go what looks to me like a slight step further than this traditional storm windows, which are storm shutters. I've been taking a look at those lately. They make some metal storm shutters that are actually quite attractive. And they look like they could provide pretty good security too. Because while people could, if you were going to bug out and you left your home boarded up, people could get through the plywood. Some of these metal storm shutters I've been looking at, short of the zombie hordes, and even then, I don't know about that. Some of them look like better than having burglar bars on your home. So that's a consideration. You might take a gander at it. I don't have any experience with them yet. I've just been kind of looking at them and just something to think about. Something else to note about homes: if you have an alarm on your home, most of the time in hurricanes, right after the hurricane or during the hurricane, the police will ignore, and they'll usually tell everyone via local news that they're going to be ignoring any home alarms that go off. That doesn't mean your home alarm is useless, and if you've been thinking about one, then it's not a reason to put it off. A home alarm, if you set it when you're in the home, it's still a great way of alerting you that someone is coming in that does not belong. It also can potentially alert your neighbors to, hey, something's going on over there. Just one extra measure. I wouldn't run out and have a home alarm installed just for hurricane season, but those are added bonuses of them.
It's a good thing to just have in your home anyway.
Hmm. And we talked a little bit about bags a little while ago, and so this will we'll pick up vehicles and talk about bags for a second with those. We talked about in episode 16, like we covered all kinds of bags. Car bags was one of them, and again, we recommend you go back and listen to that show for the finer details of what should go into it. But I will say, you really do want maps. You really do want to have. You need to have at least three routes out of your city. What are the evacuation routes? What are the evacuation routes you have planned? What are the evacuation routes the city has planned? They may not always be exactly the same. I'm gonna just kind of throw that out there. A lot of people, we had
Intentionally,
that.
by the way.
Yeah, exactly.
Intentionally.
We had. I don't remember which hurricane it was.
It wasn't actually a hurricane at all.
It was a non-hurricane.
Right.
Well, it was a hurricane, but I think it missed us, or
And I cannot remember the name now. It was
it doesn't
between,
matter.
yeah,
But the
before Ike.
the point was I think it was like 48 hours people got stuck on the
Right,
highways.
and that was to make a trip to Austin, which is 180 miles away.
Yeah. So a 2 hour trip for some people turned into a 48-hour trip. People were running out of gas. People were suffering heat exhaustion. It was,
Running out of gas is actually a big problem, and as you enter hurricane season, keep your tank topped off.
yes, keep it topped off. And that brings us into a system of copy canning with gasoline that you can do. You can buy gas cans, store them appropriately, and then the next time you go to fill your vehicle, you fill the can. And then you put the can in a safe, well ventilated place. And then just before your next fill up, you empty the can into your gas tank, go to the gas station, fill your vehicle back up, and fill the can back up again. You can do this with multiple cans. You can do rotating cans. You can go bananas with this if you want to. This I'm just talking about the basics
And the
here.
reason you want to do this is gas, especially non-diesel gasoline. So gasoline, kind of stuff most of us put in our cars, does not last very long.
No, it
Especially
doesn't.
now when we have ethanol in our gasoline.
Yeah.
Lasts even less time than it used to.
Yeah, I think you pretty much want to use any stored gasoline within about a week. I think when we had Bert on the show and we were talking about generators, I think that's what it, basically, he was telling us you want to get that gas into a vehicle and used as quickly as possible because
Yeah.
it breaks down so quickly. But I think within a week, you should be fine.
Yep.
Even 2 weeks, you'll probably be fine.
And actually, vehicles is a good time to bring up the generator discussion as well.
Hmm.
Just really fast. This is a quick one. If you have generators, and I don't mean the ones that are attached to your home, although those require maintenance too. I just don't know as well personally what that maintenance is.
It depends on the individual unit,
Right.
but it's a good course of action. I think is about once a year to every 6 months.
But if you have portable generators, even if you haven't used them in a while, especially if you haven't used them in a while, go get them serviced.
Yeah.
They do require service, just like any other engine. It is an engine; it requires service. I actually have mine scheduled to go in next week, and they're going to get. So I've got two of them, two 2,000-watt generators, and they're going to get serviced next week so that they are good to go when Houston hurricane season really kicks in, which is normally really towards late August, early September,
Mm.
sometimes even into October. Actually, always into October.
So, along with keeping gas tanks and gas cans topped and ready to go, vehicle maintenance. If you have any nagging issues any kind of serious mechanical issues, now's the time to get it fixed. Now's the time to deal with it. Don't put it off till you're spending 48 hours on a highway
I was about to say
somewhere.
you don't want to be halfway to whatever your destination is,
Hmm.
in the middle of crazy evacuation traffic and have your vehicle break down.
And move on to pets. So in episode 4, we talked about dogs and we talked about storing for pets. We talked about some first aid and medical considerations for pets. If you haven't listened to that episode, we recommend you go back and listen to it. If it didn't appear in your podcast feed, you can go into the website, go to the podcast episodes category, go back through the previous episodes, and you can listen to it directly from the website if it doesn't show up in your feed anymore. Um, you want to have proper identification, including immunization records. And by immunization records, we don't mean expired immunization records.
No, if you need to shelter your pet for any reason whatsoever, most of the shelters require proof of immunization, current immunizations. So you need to keep all of that somewhere where you have access to it, probably in your bug out bag or your even in your blackout kit potentially, somewhere where you're going to have easy access to those papers. You might even keep it in your car kit.
And I will tell you this about kennels, they will not overlook the fact that you do not have those records available on a pretty smile or a handshake
No,
or your word for
or
it.
the fact that there's a major storm coming in. It just doesn't matter.
By you bringing in an animal that you cannot prove is immunized and has all their shots and everything else, you are then endangering all of the other animals they have in their care.
Right, which is just a liability for them. They're not going to open up to it.
Hmm.
So also, even if it doesn't matter whether you're going to kennel your dog or whether you're going to take them with you or whether you're going to shelter in place, you want an ample supply of food and water for them. So we talked about the water already. Also make sure that you keep an extra bag of dog food. You can store dog food the same way you can your own. cycle through it. It does go bad after time, lasts longer than people food,
Hmm.
but you still want to cycle through it. So don't just store it and then keep buying new bags, using new bags, and the old one sits there forever. Some other things to consider: you're going to want a carrier. So a good quality carrier that's properly sized to your pet. That means they should be able to stand up in it and turn around. If they can't stand up in it and turn around, it's not properly sized to your pet. And that is because if you are transporting them, you're going to want that product with you. If you are, sorry about that, I've got a phone call and that was the beep that you just heard. But if you're transporting them, you're going to want that. The other thing is during major storms, animals usually become a little bit distressed, sometimes a lot distressed, depends on your pet. It's sometimes good to keep them in that kennel during the storm. It keeps them out of trouble, keeps them from freaking out. And it usually smaller cave-like spaces like that are good for animals.
There's also a product on the market. I know my father uses it for his dog, and I probably should start using it for tactical Weimaraner alert system. Who, as he gets older, is becoming a lot more sensitive to inclement weather and thunderstorms and jazz like that. It's called Quiet Moments. Think of it as like Valium for dog.
Yeah.
Not quite that strong. It just kind of calms them down, kind of gets them a little loose, and it's like, okay, thunder and lightning, not so very, very frightening.
Basically, you've just given your dog a whiskey on the rocks.
Yes.
So it's a nice way for them to unwind at the end of the day. Other things to keep in mind. So that may be a good product you want to keep on hand. Any medications your dog's on, like yourself, you want to keep a supply of the medication for your dog. Or cat. We love our pets. I keep saying dog because I have dogs. Everything I just told you applies to cats just as much as dogs, or any pet you might have. You have a bird, same thing. I don't know about the standing up and turning around for a bird, though.
Check
You'll
with your
have to,
vet. Yeah,
yeah,
you
check
check
with
with
your
your
vet
vet
on
on
that.
that.
And then another thing to keep in mind and this is dogs more than anything else, muzzle, collar, and leashes. There are places where you may have to go where they do require you to muzzle your dog.
I don't know if your cat's like my mother's
It
cats.
may need to be muzzled
It
too.
may need to be muzzled too.
Collar, you want to keep the tags on there, especially, a lot of people don't keep tags on their pets, but during storm season, I highly recommend keeping your pets tagged. And again, muzzle and leash. I'm also going to recommend the chipping. I know this is a big debate. I personally recommend it. Some people don't like it. If you don't, that's fine. I'm just going to say if you can chip your dog, go for it. That way, if something does happen and you get separated, a very good chance that you will get reunited with your pet. Some other items you might want to consider is a TV antenna. Now, I'm not talking about the giant TV antenna your house had in the 70s. I'm talking about the new digital TV antennas. If you have the old antennas, well, I was going to say that's great, but the reality is they're useless. You probably just want to get rid of it. You can scrap it. If it's there and you don't want to do something with it, well, I guess it's decoration.
Honestly, you do want to get rid of it
Yeah.
because my understanding is they do. It's one more thing that can get ripped from your roof.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's they're not functional anymore. Get rid of it. Get it
Yep.
off your roof. Get it out of your hair. They're
Yeah. The new digital antennas are very small, especially in comparison to the old analog antennas. You require one to get a signal. They're very good in any urban environment. You're definitely going to get a very clear signal. I am actually in the process of trying to find one now. So as soon as I do, I'll let everybody know which one and why I picked what I did and the journey that I took to get there. But they're relatively inexpensive too. I think I've seen them for as low as like 20 some odd dollars, and I've seen them for as much as hundreds and hundreds of dollars. So I'm probably going to go on the lower end of the scale this time because it is for I'm just my backup TV, if you will. It's for me to be able to plug a small LCD TV into a generator, plug the antenna in, and be able to get information.
And before we wrap up today, we just want to make note that if you're interested in learning more about generators, especially the built in place automatic switchover generators, episode 6, we had an interview with a really tremendous guy. His name's Bert Koenig. Go check out that episode and learn more about generators. If you've been thinking about one, like we've said several times in this episode, now's the time to really think about it. They're not going to come out to your house the 3 days before uh, the storm hits and install a generator in your home. I will tell you that the process typically takes About a month, depending on how quickly your city's or county's permitting office works. The big ones, they're really not something that you want to try to install yourself. Those really do need to be done by a professional electrician, unless you are a professional electrician or just have exceptional electrical wiring skills or are a master electrician or something of that variety. But
And we still don't recommend it because if you're a master electrician, you're probably not also a master plumber, and it
yeah.
requires both sides of that equation. So hire a professional. Call a guy like Bert. He's fantastic. If you don't live in the Houston area, maybe call Bert anyway and see if he has a recommendation of who to call in
hmm
your area. He's very knowledgeable about the industry. He's been in it for a very long time.
And with that, we wrap up episode 21. Thank you for joining us today. If you liked the podcast, make sure to leave us a review in iTunes. It helps others find us. If you didn't, use the feedback form on the website and tell us what you didn't like. We're here for you, and we're always looking for ways to improve. Be sure to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube through the links on the top right-hand side of the site at www.intherabbithole.com. Don't forget to sign up for the newsletter by visiting the newsletter page on the site. By connecting with us, you will receive updates about the site, notifications of new articles, and podcast episodes. That's right, we're not just a podcast. Every week, articles are posted to our site, intherabbithole.com, that cover all manner of topics relating to surviving in an urban environment, whether in good times or in extreme circumstances. Show notes are posted with each and every episode where we invite you to comment on the show and interact with us and each other. Till next time, stay safe and sound.